that the AI for everyone, AI for all, AI everywhere, will it make it a little bit more real? But in the larger space, if I'm doing a Salesforce, that has intelligence, Apple has intelligence, the device has intelligence, the OS has intelligence now. All of them are against it because of the shift towards open source and shift towards small language. Hello, everyone. Welcome to one more episode of Unlocking the AI Advantage podcast. And this is your host, Ramesh Danta. So, this episode is coming to you at the beginning of 2025. And as always, we start the year with what's going to happen in the AI space. But it's becoming so difficult to predict because things are happening on an hourly basis, if not daily basis. So, we're going to look at the trends and innovations that are actually going to shape the future of AI. To do that, I have an excellent guest. His name is Daniel Rasmus. So, Daniel is a founder and principal analyst with Serious Insights. It's his own advisory consulting firm, and he's a keynote speaker. He has written multiple books and is a scenario planning expert. And actually, he teaches scenario and strategic planning. So, who better than to have somebody who can plan for different scenarios in the AI space than Daniel. So I'm very excited to introduce Daniel Rasmus for this particular episode. Daniel, welcome.
Hi, yeah, I'm Dan Rasmus, and I am an analyst by trade. So I think about what's happening in technology markets, and I work with both vendors and end users to help ensure that they are getting the most value out of their technology. But I'm also a long-range thinker. I teach scenario planning at the University of Washington. So whenever there's a question about what's the future, the far future, going to look like, my answer is always, I don't know, but I have a good way of thinking about it. So if we get into any far-flung ideas, we'll be talking about multiple futures. But I think most of today, we're going to spend our time talking about what's happening, what has happened, and what's going to happen over the next year. And as you said, we're already seeing, disruptions within hours rather than weeks or months.
Great. Hey, Dan, welcome. And the little story that how I met Dan was recently we both attended Consumer Electronics Show, CES. Now the brand itself as CES, no longer Consumer Electronics Show. It was in Vegas, and we both, I was part of the media and Dan was part of the analysts. And then for us, there was this media analyst lunch. So we were standing in line to get our lunch, and then Dan was next to me and we started talking, and then we were able to connect. So what's going on in the AI space? And then afterwards I reached out to Dan. So Dan, would you be our guest on this talk? And that's how Dan is here. So that's amazing in how we connected, Dan. So
yeah, so physical meetings still matter.
Yeah, definitely physical meetings. Yeah, exactly. That's great. So with that, and then also to the audience, we are meeting the day after DeepSeek. So it's basically a $1 trillion wiped out from the markets yesterday. And so that's one of the topics that will be coming too. But that is an indication of, one thing, one news item could shake up in the AI space. So that's the world we are living in. Okay. So Dan, with that, so now let's look at just a quick summary of what happened in 2024 and what innovations really caught your attention that you think will pave the way for us in 2025.
Well, I think there was, the beginning or the middle of the year was multimodal, right? So we were watching videos of AIs that were looking at your screen. They were interacting with things. They were talking to you. We had great fun at my house over the holidays with the Santa voice of ChatGPT and having a ho 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 every time I would talk to ChatGPT about a recipe or answering a trivia question. But I think that quickly got overtaken by agents, right? And I hate the term agentic AI. I think that's the worst marketing term that's ever, one of the worst marketing terms ever. Agentic. No one's going to end up saying that. And I think we're going to end up with a wide range of marketing spin around what agents are. But I think that's, one of the big areas, and we'll talk about that, going forward as well, because I think there's still a lot of confusion in that space, both from the marketing standpoint and from the technology perspective. And then I think, looking at the early indications of the year, or at least the hope of everybody, was this is going to be the year of AI.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we've now kicked the year of AI down the curb of 2025 is going to be the year that we get the payback. So I think there's one of the big questions around it. And I was traveling in Europe, giving talks in November, and the primary talk was, where's the ROI in AI? And I was at Microsoft at the time that we were asking still, in the early 2000s, where's the ROI in PCs, right? And so technology is constantly fighting that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is, how we measure the value of technology, and what kind of timescales we use to figure out how value is created. So I think those were for me the big things. And of course, there were a lot of, this model overtook this model, and a lot of conversations about everybody was dropping models. Of course, you had
Yeah.
the 12 days of shipments from OpenAI.
OpenAI.
Yeah, I thought was an interesting marketing ploy, some of which worked better than other pieces. But so you're seeing companies that, granted they have a huge market cap, but they're now trying to figure out how to be, a real company with marketing and gimmicks and everything else. And so they're not just a technology company; they're trying to evolve into a company of engagement. And I think that was an interesting twist at the end of the year.
Okay, so you're talking about, hey, people are asking you about the ROI. I think that was the question at the beginning of last year. People were asking as well, and then looks like we are going to shift that, by every year. Hey, this is the year of AI kind of thing. But one thing that I'm seeing much more is that AI for all and AI everywhere kind of a terminology that's coming. And to some extent, looks like that may be true because of few things that happen. One is the large language models, the investment that needs to go into that. The discussion has shifted to small language models. That's one piece that seemed to have happened last year. The other one is proprietary models versus open source models, right? So Dan, can you talk a little bit about not so much about the technology per se, but the shift in discussion on those? Does it mean that the AI for everyone, AI for all, AI everywhere, will it make it a little bit more real because of the shift towards open source and shift towards small language? Does it have an impact at all?
Well, I think it has an impact. I think the impact may be negative when it comes to ROI, because when you have AI everywhere, it's going to be hard to watch, right? So I've had this conversation with Apple Intelligence, for instance, right? So, or if you just look at copilots, right? So if everybody has AI on their desktop, we end up going back to the same old formula of Microsoft or Salesforce or whoever going, every person who does a spreadsheet is going to save 3 minutes a day. And if we add those 3 minutes a day up for a year times your entire employee base, voila, there's a cost savings enough that you end up being able to renew your contracts, right? And I think that's a false metric. I think it may well be absolutely true that it's enough savings that it justifies having the technology. It doesn't tell you what it really does to your business, right? Are you thinking about the long-term impact to how processes change, how you generate revenue, what your SAT scores are from customers? All of that stuff is a longer-term view, right? What's my market cap of my business? If I'm becoming a quote-unquote AI business, my market cap has to be part of that, because if it's not growing, then did I make the right bet on technology? Correct. So having a small language model, absolutely. If I'm looking at it in a microcosm of saying, if I have to pony up this much money to do all this compute and cost and energy and all this stuff, and I feel bad about it if I use OpenAI or Claude or whatever, and I have a small language model and I can do just as well if I run it on my own machines, and great, I can have a very clear build versus buy discussion.
Yeah.
But then what, right? Then now that I've implemented something, I now have a significant amount, especially if we're talking about open source. It's one of the areas that that concerns me is the management of the models, the management of guardrails, the understanding of retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, right? Of being able to understand, how do we put the content in that we're actually retrieving? Do the
Yeah.
people trust that content?
Yeah.
I've already had discussions. I gave a talk at Knowledge Management World about this. I've had discussions with people about I don't trust, so and so was on the team and put this material into, and this is what we return as the RAG return, right? And it's right, and it's not hallucinating, but I don't trust the content that they put in there. I think there should have been other content that was put into that, right? And so it becomes a very human thing of what am I training the model on? What am I using as the set of content, And so, we end up with the management issues. If I take it completely in house, I run away with the management issues, and then finally the kind of I think of it the arguing with myself about AI responses, right? So I know as a tester of the technology, I will sit here and ask multiple AIs the same question and see how they respond. If I'm in an environment where that's proactively happening, right, and so I'm creating a piece of content or a proposal inside of my organization, I've got Copilot, I've got Apple Intelligence, I've got some stuff from Salesforce, and they're all giving me. Anybody who's used Grammarly inside of Word has seen this experience of the Word suggesting that this, and Grammarly's arguing with Word about what the right grammar is, right? Imagine that at a higher scale of I want to write a proposal and give me an outline, and the outlines look nothing like each other, right? Because they were trained on different models and made different assumptions, and so which one do I trust? It then goes back to being a human issue, right? And so if I have AI everywhere, is it really a time savings, right? So there's a whole set of conversations about where does AI actually cost you time, because it is everywhere and you're now mediating the AIs, right?
Yeah. So I think you're bringing up really, really good points, which is the challenges of this AI everywhere, AI for all may not be like, it seemed like it's good to talk about it, but in an enterprise world, in a business world, it's challenging to implement, as you said. For example, the Grammarly, the perfect example, versus some other, like if I'm doing a Salesforce, that has intelligence, Apple has intelligence, the device has intelligence, the OS has intelligence now, all of them arguing against it. So then the user, it's unless there is a structure around, who decides, who defines it, it's a real risk of it's not making much progress.
Yeah, and it's not new, right? I mean, I worked for an aerospace company at one point that had a open source bias, and it was that we're not going to buy both ends of the wire from the same company. So you'd buy a SQL database from one company and the SQL interface for the PC or the Mac from another company.
It's called best of breed philosophy.
Well, it was also we're not going to give one company all of our all of our money and all of our trust. And so if a piece of it falls apart, we can fall back. What you ended up with was a lot of coordination.
Yeah.
Because you, as the technology department, right, the IT team, had to go say, oh, well, this one, this version of this doesn't talk to that in the right way anymore. And so now how do we manage the pieces? And we ended up becoming the architects, which, that was the job, right? The architect of the solution. But I think it was a lot harder because rather than buying and putting trust in a solution that actually worked, we tried to create our own thing,
Yeah.
and sometimes it didn't work as well as we had hoped, right? And
Right.
so it ended up costing money rather than saving money.
Correct. Exactly. So, all right. So we talked about the things that have been happening over the last year, and one of the things that you mentioned, apart from multimodal AI, is the AI agents.
Yeah.
Again, at times, I mean, we've been in this space for quite some time. We know, right? So vendors try to push out some things. It almost seems to me 2023 was AI tools. It's all about AI tools everywhere. It will, radically improve your life. And then 2024 was about GPTs. Hey, this GPT, that GPT, and multimodal. And now 2025 seems like AI agents. So if you could level set to the audience,
Yeah.
what is your take on these AI agents? Are they the trends innovation? And we both attended the keynote that Jensen Wang, NVIDIA, had at CES, and then AI, agentic AI, of course, is what he was more talking about. Is the AI agents is a real thing, or what are the implications of it 2025?
Yeah, I think they're a real thing, with a lot of caveats, right? So one of the slides that I put in my deck now is from 1995 from a
Wow.
magazine called Datamation,
Okay.
where I
I
did a
remember that.
forecast. I did a forecast of 1, 3, and 5 year forecasts for agents in 1995,
Man,
right?
wow.
So agents are not new.
Did you
AI and
call them
agents,
agents at that time?
absolutely. It was an
Okay.
agent. It was a forecast on intelligent agents from 1995. Not new, right?
Wow.
And there were agents that were running on Macs and PCs back in the 90s. They were expert system based and logic based, and we probably would call them RPA today. And a lot of the RPA companies,
Yeah.
I think, are kind of rebranding themselves as agent companies now, right? So we're already, I think a lot of the agent stuff that's the new marketing term. So I have to figure out how to have it. And if I'm building off of an engine that has an agentic capability, then I sort of have it already, right? So if I'm already partnering with
Mhm.
a language model that has an agent feature, I can say that I have that, and I can try to figure out how to put that into my features. I think the bigger issue is that we don't know what we want from agents or what they are. So I was briefed recently by Microsoft on the
Okay.
agents around Copilot, right? And one of the characteristics or characterizations they gave me was that agents were like documents, right? And everybody would have their own set of agents, and they've come up with a console that manages cost and looks at execution and all that kind of stuff. Which is something they, of course, never did with Excel. There was never, and they were saying it's like everybody has a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and they all have their own version. Again, from an IT professional standpoint, that's one of the reasons that we have data lakes and business intelligence these days, is because I remember meetings where everybody would walk in with
Yeah.
their own spreadsheet, and we'd say, what was the sales on the West Coast this week? And you'd get 6 different numbers because everybody had different spreadsheets, right? And so that I could see that kind of level of agent, if it's all personal, becoming very, very much a contention point of well, I sent my agent to do these things, and well, what data sources did you use, and how did it bring the stuff together? And then mine's different than yours, right? That's one level, and that's very personal and very knowledge worker centric. And on the other side, there are
Yeah.
companies that are talking about agents kind of living and coexisting with your enterprise software, figuring out what it does and rewriting it in an agent form, so that eventually agents overtake enterprise software and become the new model for how we execute all processes across an organization. That's a very different vision, right? And so, which one of those are going to win? Are they going to coexist? I think that's, a lot of the discussion. I think just saying that I have agents is insufficient. I think organizations have to say, what are what capabilities do I need? What do I need agents to do? And then how do I think about the governance of those for our processes? Because we still, the kind of single source of truth that comes out of databases, we still need to maintain that an organization has a view of itself
Yeah.
And that's what enterprise software was supposed to do, right? It was supposed to give you here's how much inventory we have, here's what's happening on the
Yes.
factory floor, here's what's happening in our scheduling systems, here's what's happening in the air if I'm an air, an air company, right? And when we look at, we have to think about are agents going to be able to do those same things, and are we going to be able to trust them? Are we going to be able to understand them? There's discussion, of course, Salesforce, Mark Benioff did a big thing. He talked about agents as digital labor. I think that introduced a whole interesting side conversation about how do you manage digital labor, right? That's what does that mean for replacement of human labor, and what does it mean for managing digital labor? But I think it also, raises the question of how am I coordinating my interactions with customers, and how am I building the architectures? One of their solutions is to have, they're talking about, and others are as well, guardian agents, right? So I have agents that manage other agents and double check them. My question is how much hierarchy do you have, right? Do you have angelic agents at some point that are at some higher level that manage the guardian agents, right? We could have a whole agent mythology kind of coming around, right? And where do you trust them, and which ones become so ethereal that it's just got to be right because they're the highest level, right? I don't think we think through these problems as well as we need to. I think agents right now are, they're real. They do exist, right? Like if you're looking at an M&M commercial with Santa Claus, he does exist. They do exist, right? Agents do exist. But I think I think we're at the point that instead of this being the year of agents being the thing that takes over everything, I think it's the year that we're going to grapple with what it means when we have
what it
agents,
means, and
right?
how they fit into the process.
How does it fit? Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So with that, Dan, I would like to continue this discussion, because the agents, the workflows and processes, as you mentioned, is very important in terms of who is managing the agents. And one of the things on the consumer side I've seen, I'm sure you have seen, and lots of people have seen, the OpenAI's last week, they announced this operator, right? So which is this is to make a reservation. One of the demos that they have done is that, if you want to make a restaurant reservation, and a person has to go through the browser, go to the website, and then has to figure out, okay, I want my reservation at this point of time, and then comes back and says, you do not have any availability there. Now you have to make a decision. So there's a decision tree involved, but it was a pretty impressive demo in terms of how this operator was able to navigate this back and forth on a browser-based kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for that particular application, it seemed to work. So Dan, what's your take on an operator kind of an agent for specific use cases?
Well, all demos work most of the time. I shouldn't say all demos, but almost all demos work, right? Right.
Yeah.
I've made plenty of software demos, and there's a lot of making sure that they work. I'll say that I was playing with DeepSeek, and I was playing with ChatGPT doing research stuff yesterday, which should have been easy for it to do. The answers from both of them were fairly good, and I'll get back to your question in a second. The answers were fairly good from both of them. I asked them for the research. I said, go research this area, find me use case examples in the real world, and give me the company and the technology that was used in the use case, and then give me a link to the reference. Every link on both systems were completely 404 errors, all of them.
Wow.
Not one link actually worked, right? So I have some skepticism about I'm going to go off to a system and have some interaction with it, and is it going to actually go to the right place, right? So whenever there's a failure at one place in a system, I always question, is that failure going to precipitate into other areas of function? It may work great in the demo if I've trained it and I'm doing open table, and it may know all kinds of things about open table. If I send it to some random website that it hasn't interacted with before, I don't know if it's going to know how to do that right?
Correct.
And how's it going to represent me in the right way? And yes, I'm giving it a very clear and specific task. And I think I think those things are going to happen, right? As you said in the operator demo, I think those things are going to happen. I mean, that's the hope we all had with Siri originally, was I could say, hey Siri, get me an open table reservation at this restaurant. as every device in my house now just glowed, right? Give me a reservation at this place at this time for 3 people, and it would go off and open table and make the reservation for me and put it on my calendar, and it would do all that stuff. I think of that as the last mile of AI. Those are the frustrations I still have of there's very specific, detailed things that I want to do, that I want to just make a verbal command that's got the right data in it and have it go do that on a daily basis with lots of the work that I do in research, and it doesn't do it yet. And so good demo. I don't think we're also, when we've seen other good demos, where we're showing ChatGPT documents and it's reading stuff, and how often do you do that? I haven't done that very often. I'm not sure it actually knows how to do that yet. So I remain skeptical until I see it at scale. And again, as you said at the beginning, it could be that 3 weeks from now, they say, we're releasing this thing at scale and it actually works and people are happy with it. Great. When I see it, I'll buy into it.
Right, exactly. I'm with you on that one. So, and one of the things that Dan, you alluded to at the beginning is that the return on investment, right? So this is the year people will be, trying to reach some ROI, or asking very serious questions about it. And to some extent, DeepSeek is an answer to that, because people have been spending billions of dollars. I shouldn't say people, companies are spending, they're claiming they're spending billions of dollars in training, with inferencing the models and all that stuff. And suddenly this company comes out of nowhere and says, I'm able to build these models for a fraction of your cost, kind of thing. So given all that, so the ROI discussions are very real for companies, right? So they have to justify the investments. So then how are you going about advising, clients, and how to reach their ROI, how to get to some kind of ROI with respect to AI investments? What are you asking them to do?
Yeah, well, I'm asking them to work with their finance organizations to actually build models of the processes that they're talking about modifying, right? And so not just looking at the cost savings and incremental time, but if, for instance, it's something that's supposed to cause revenue generation. So I'll give you a good example, right? So there are systems now that will do personalized messages for subject lines in marketing campaigns, right? That's a pain in the butt for a marketing person. In the old days, they'd have to handcraft, every mess, and great time savings. And I absolutely give it to them that they can do time savings for a marketing person writing personalized subject lines. Mm-hmm. The personalized subject lines over the course of multiple campaigns generate more revenue than if they didn't have personalized subject lines, right? That's a multi-month thing, right? That's not just one campaign. That's looking at multiple campaigns, and do we see patterns of behavior with customers being engaged, right? The idea is that the marketing company is telling you that the more personalized, the more engaged people are going to be. Does that play out? Does it play out in clicks? Does it play out in actual revenue generated, derived from those? And so you mentioned us meeting at the beginning is serendipity. I've written about on my website what I call the serendipity economy, where we have to think about the long-term ramifications, that the time savings, you can actually, absolutely take that, but does the business value actually have a relationship to the savings that takes place in time, right? And I think that's where I'm advising organizations, is to really think about what are the models, how long-term do you measure the performance of a process, and then think about it in those terms, not just I was on a webinar the other day, and it was the the ROI of AI, Gen AI, right? And I high hopes. It was a research company, and I had high hopes that they were going to give me some breakthrough thinking. And at the end of the day, they added up it used to take this long to search for this thing, and now it takes this long. And if you add those time savings up, there you go. There's your justification, and that to me is not enough, right?
It
Again,
has to be systemic.
yeah, it may be enough to justify the $20 a month that you pay for one of these things, but
Correct.
is it enough that it's transformative, right?
Yeah.
And I think you have to look at a much bigger canvas of the organization to figure that out.
Great. Yeah, good. So, by the way, so on your website, seriousinsights.net, it's got lots of goodies. So I, one of the things that Dan has put out there, his trends and predictions for this year, and so what's happening in the space, a blog article. And so seriousinsights.net. So Dan, I was reading that article, and then some of the concepts that you mentioned, digital labor, were referenced there. But one thing that caught my attention is AI fatigue,
Yeah.
combating AI fatigue, right? So again, to some extent, what you just mentioned before this, hey, you sat in a webinar, somebody was going to talk about ROI, and you sat through the webinar, and at the end of the webinar, that person said, it's like a very basic stuff of how they
Yeah.
saved. And you, I don't want to say wasted your time, you spent your time, the fatigue comes in, because if you see one more of those kinds of things, you just is like you will not give any credibility to this discussion. So if you could talk about what in your words is AI fatigue, what does it mean?
Yeah.
And what are the ways that we can combat the fatigue, please?
Well, I think one of them is, just kind of the overwhelming number of, it's the message that's in the market for technology, and so everything is about it. And so that's, when we read about it, it can just become overwhelming to think about Claude just came out, and then Gemini came out, and it's got it ended up higher on the benchmarks. And, does that mean something to me in IT? Does it mean something to me as a knowledge worker? I don't know. Right. Because the next week I could get the new benchmarks and ChatGPT, new model, blah, 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 beat Gemini again. And then there's DeepSeek and right. And, I think that's one level. The other level is I think this inundation of AI into everything, right? So it's now in my browser, it's, and talk about, new business models. So just the last week, Google and Microsoft both now, who used to charge $20 a piece to have access to AI inside of their desktop tools, started giving it away, but they raised the price of their desktop tools by a couple of dollars. And so it's not $20 now, it's $2 that you're paying, but you now have a limited version of Gemini and Copilot inside of your productivity tools for general users, right? The enterprises still have to deal with whatever their enterprise licenses are, but I have the professional, whatever, friends and family thing that I get from Microsoft. And I now have Copilot in there, whereas a week ago I didn't, right? But I also, again, I have Copilot. I'm running on a Macintosh, so I have Apple Intelligence. I've been paying for Grammarly for years, and I now have, and I have all the other models. I use Notebook LM. I look at all this stuff, and if it's not me, where that's my job. If my job is really to be a sales guy and create credible messages to sell things to my customers, do I need all of those things, right? And they just kind of show up. And what do I do with them, right? And in some cases, organizations are asking people to become AI literate. I know from multiple surveys that most companies are not investing in AI literacy and actually training people. They're all doing it just in time and, go watch some YouTube videos and figure out how the thing works. And at the same time, they're talking about this. I've done some recent survey work, and I'm finding that the large majority of people, something like 75% of people, their job descriptions have not changed to reflect that they now live in an AI world, but yet they're being given AI tasks and expectations. And so that's now extra work that's over and above whatever your functional work is. And so that adds to now I have to go do some extra stuff on the side of my regular job to learn how to use the tools for my regular job, which causes not just AI fatigue, it causes regular fatigue, right?
Right, exactly.
So,
So there's a
yeah,
learning fatigue too, as you mentioned, right? Because
absolutely.
yeah, but how many things can you keep learning, right? So
Well, and not only do you keep learning, but the thing, unlike most technology in the past, the curve, if I looked at if I was going to be a good Microsoft Office suite user in the old days, right, I could pretty well count on, once they shipped something new, it was going to be 2 years before it changed, right?
correct.
Master Excel and Word and PowerPoint, I knew all the stuff, and 2 years from now it was probably going to be new, but not really new. So I could still apply most of that knowledge, right? And now, I have both the tools change and have new features that I'm not quite sure what they are, right? So how do I use tasks in ChatGPT? I don't know. I just sort of showed up and shows up on some of my machines and not some of my other ones. I'm not sure how
Correct.
to use that and how do I take advantage of it? But then the underlying models may change to the point of if you're having a conversation with O4 versus O1 on ChatGPT, that's a completely different thing, right? The way that you do the prompts, the interaction with it may be different. And so I
Yeah.
have to, even within a tool, I have to learn to do different things.
Correct.
And then of course there's the modalities of the tools, right? If I get proficient at doing writing, but then I want to go create an image, I have to, how do I now become a verbal visual thinker, right? And so that's a different skill than finding clip art in a clip art thing, right? And so there's, as you said, there's lots of learning. I like that part, by the way, of AI. I think it's forcing people from a standpoint of pushing people to be continuous learners, which is something I very much believe people need to be.
People need to do
Um,
exactly.
I'm not sure it's the continuous learning I would pick for everybody, but it's
Yeah,
the
exactly,
continuous
exactly.
learning that we're kind of asked and necessitated at the moment.
Right. So good. So Dan, so far we touched upon some of the key things that are shaping. One is definitely multimodal stuff that happened
Yeah,
last year, but continuing evolution, and then the agents that have come in our the landscape, and then the ROI discussions that are shaping up. And one of the things that you did mention that open source brings up is this whole um, governance piece of it, so to say, right?
yeah,
So for like better words, like you need a governance piece, right? So within enterprise, you need some kind of a governance, and so definitely policy framework for their enterprise. But in the larger space, right? So in the countries and continents and the government and regulatory authorities, there is also the AI regulations and governance
yeah.
discussions have been taking place. So I would like to spend some time in 2025. What is that we should expect with respect to the regulations and then governance?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm a scenario planner, and we're kind of entering a phase of, I think, some chaos right now.
Yeah,
And what's the playoff going to be between the EU's rather strict rules and the US's now seemingly even more lax rules than last week? And what's the influence on those? I think it's interesting when we talk about DeepSeek. What are the rules in China under which it was developed? That's a
correct.
whole
And there's
different
also
regulatory
censorship
framework,
aspect
right?
of within the model itself that people are pointing it out. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's going to be one of the big questions. We also have not seen any of the legal cases really come to fruition, right? The copyright cases and other things that we've seen a lot of legal wrangling where we've had cases that have been consolidated under other cases that are similar and trying to find some framework within the legal system to not have a bunch of small rulings, but having bigger, more impactful rulings.
hmm
Those haven't happened yet. So, one of the, the long range speculation things I have is, what happens if the copyright cases turn out that either the companies can't use them without permission and without payment, or that they are asked to pay a lot, right, to all these authors. That's going to hurt their revenue stream. The other side could mean that they have to retrain their models based on, all the PDFs they found on the dark web that they used for training it in the first place, right?
Right.
And I think there's a lot, I think that's going to have a back and forth with the regulatory frameworks as well, as because we're not even at the point that we've got, a lot of the discovery is visible. And so I think those legal cases are going to influence what happens in the regulatory space. And so, yeah, I think as much as this is the year of agents, it could be the year that we start seeing, and legal proceedings often take a very long time to play out. And so we may start seeing some of those rulings have some meaningful impact. But again, that's, I don't know where the legal system is going to take us in that space. The other piece, by the way, about open source that we did not talk about is the labor, right? So already a labor shortage. And as you said, we were talking about what end users, the people who actually know how to build, manage, and augment models is a pretty limited pool. And colleges and universities are running around trying to figure out how to train people on how to do LM in engineering and things like that. That takes some time to get people there. And so if companies are doing open source, they also need to think about they may not be able to find the right people to actually do it themselves unless they're really well heeled, right? So if you're a large bank or a large energy company, you may have enough dollars that you can get somebody to not go to work for Anthropic or OpenAI or Microsoft or whoever. But if you're a medium-sized company and you want to do open source AI, you're going to be stuck with kind of doing it out of the can and fiddling around yourself because you can't afford the kind of people you need to make it your own. You just can't afford them.
So the skill set is another area you think in 2025. Already there's a shortage. You will see more shortage. But again, I think the point that you're mentioning is that it's not general shortage of people per se, shortage of the right kind of skill sets that you need.
Right, exactly.
Right. Because the skill set itself, if I see it, it's evolving, right? So as you said, right? So the LM, the piece of it is, that is the realization of last year. And this year now, the integration of the pieces, like there's an agent, like there is an agent here, there's an agent there. Then how do you stitch them together to actually come up with a business outcome?
Right. Well, but I think there's still, even at the LMM level, if we're talking about open source and you want to tweak it yourself, you're going to have to build your own embeddings, your own RAG, whatever it is that makes it yours. Yeah. Because a generalized model, a small model or a large model, they don't know your business. They were not trained on your content, on your practices, your philosophy, none of that stuff. So you're going to have people that know how to effectively bring that in to make that model yours if you're doing open source, right? If you're going to a third-party vendor, you can probably hire out and subcontract that stuff and say, here's what I want to do. And you get with a consultant that's part of that ecosystem. And, just like you would in the old days, go to an Oracle versus an IBM to help you figure out your database stuff. But if you decide to do it on your own and it's open source and you're using, Open SQL or whatever, then you have to have the talent in-house because or some other subset of consultants that help you build it yourself. And that's on you, right? There's no other third party to kind of push back on. And I think that talent pool is going to be fairly limited of you being able to hire people to make the models effective for your organization in the near term.
Right. So again, so Dan, I think we just started talking and I realized that we are 45 minutes into the discussion. And we have not even touched upon security. We have not touched upon robots, which is, of course, we're not going to go there. That's a totally different field. We have not talked about AI PC that is also entering the in the landscape here. I don't think we'll be able to get into any of those pieces, but I just wanted to mention them that they are there in the discussions out there. If you go out there, right, security is a big piece.
Yeah.
Robots is all over in CES, and then AI PC was talked about at the beginning, and I think it will take more shape and all this stuff. So, but within the topics that we touched upon, right? So,
Mhm.
whether it's a digital labor, agents, and those are the areas. So, one question I want to ask you before we start wrapping up is this whole concept of a killer app,
Mm.
right? So I mean, I personally don't believe in a killer app, but for example, ChatGPT 2 years ago was a killer app. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it was, right. So it really changed the tone of the discussion in the landscape. How it, I think in that aspect, that it was a killer app, right? So given what's happening with respect to agents, with respect to multi-model stuff, and then the focus on ROI, because companies can only spend so much for so long. At
Right.
some point they have to see the benefits of it. So is there something that is happening, that's a killer app that will help companies to say, hey, now I can really do meaningful stuff that impacts, has a bottom line impact to my business?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would argue that Chat GPT was not a killer app, that it was the killer app for attention-based tensor, whatever language you want to use for describing the underlying models that came out of that line of research. It became the fountainhead of that particular technologies,
Correct.
and the competitors are, relatively minor diversities off of that, right? Because they all kind of have the same underlying philosophy, which is one of the reasons that DeepSeek is interesting. And again, I think we need to look more into exactly how it was achieved. I know it's open source, so people are going to pick it apart. I've argued a long time that the energy model for these systems is probably indicative that they're not the most efficient way of doing this. And
Correct.
so there will be engineering innovations, and that may be what we're seeing here. But the killer app to me, and I have a long background in knowledge management, and I think, and if I go back to that idea of the last mile, is the amount of content that we all have and that the world has, and it's not picking out the 50 or 100 or 5,000 documents that we put into a RAG system that we use for customer service training or whatever. It's the retrieval and understanding of our content and the self-organization of our content.
Yeah.
I think we're just starting to get there. I saw an announcement from Lenovo, for instance, where they have AI they have AI now, I think it's called. It's one of my questions. You mentioned the AI PC is what are we doing with the MPUs on the chip, right? If I download a GPT for all, I can run a local model. Great. I've got a dedicated GPU. I've got neural processors, and it works well for that. But Windows, for the most part, doesn't take advantage of any of that except for auto focusing my camera or something, right? It doesn't really do anything. With the primary purpose of a PC is to manage information.
Yeah.
And I think that's a space where we're going to see a combination of small language models on device that are starting to figure out what documents do I have, organizing my photo libraries, doing things on my behalf. I think that to me is a killer app. And at the enterprise level, it's the same thing with all your content, all that stuff that's in SharePoint, all that stuff that's in various document management systems, sitting on file servers and everything else that nobody knows where it is and how to find it. Indexing is proven not sufficient, right? Just traditional search and indexing of that stuff. So being able to make that connection, and I wrote about it years ago in my book, Listening to the Future, where I talked about information finding you, right?
Okay.
And so it gets to the point that it's proactive, where the AI recognizes we're having this conversation,
Mhm.
the profile for this conversation of what we want to talk about. And when I start up my PC in the morning, it says, here's the 3 documents that you're going to want to have open when you're in this podcast, right? That would be a killer application. Right?
That's a context aware intelligence. I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think we're just nudging into that. But when I look at the applications that organizations are doing, a lot of them are doing, right, customer service first. They're managing the customer service documentation. But
Correct.
again, that's a small percentage of the information. When I was with Hughes Aircraft, we ran a system that it was certainly not intelligent, but it was architected in a way that engineers could discover kind of the history of changes for satellite systems. And that was very effective because they could learn from the past, not just here's the drawing that I'm looking at now, but what was the context of how I got to that drawing, right? How did I get the weight right for the launch platform and all that stuff? And I think being able to proactively do that is going to be a game changer. But again, I think that's, we're kind of nudging into that with a lot of the content management and document management stuff, and we'll see how successful that's going to be, enterprise by enterprise, right? There's going to be systems that put that in, and every enterprise is going to come back with their own result. I don't think there's going to be a universal killer app, but I think that app category is going to be very.
Yeah, I think exactly, and I mean that is also a huge gap that's out there, and then hopefully innovation will happen there. So Dan, few things. Can we trust the decision making of AI in risk management scenarios? And you've alluded to this in the beginning. So why don't we just address this again? Like, what's your take on the trust?
Yeah, well, I think I would not say we can trust them. I think about them in a risk management situation as being one of the collaborators, right? So if you've got a bunch of people in the room and you're debating, risks for something, the AI may be able to give you perspectives that you didn't think about, and it'll prod you to challenge your assumptions, because often in a business situation, people walk into the room with biases and assumptions about risk in the market, and the AI may be able to cut through some of that. I certainly would not trust it at this point to say what's the recommendation. In fact, most of them have guardrails against actually making a formal recommendation, because there's a whole other discussion we could have about the problem of AI knowing everything about everything and not actually having a position on anything. And so making a recommendation becomes hard, especially at a big conceptual level. But I think as one of the collaborators, right, if I'm sitting in Miro and we're doing a bunch of brainstorming on what are the risks, and you ask the AI to say, what am I missing? I think that's a very valid use, and often will result in useful information that you didn't consider.
Correct. Okay. So with that, so Dan, if you could bring it all home of what are the things that you're waiting with bated breath to happen in 2025. And so I know you mentioned context aware intelligence and those kinds of things, but if you could just bring it all home. And by the way, before Dan starts, so seriousinsights.net is where I would recommend all of you, the audience, to go. And there's a gold mine of information there. And so all the things that Dan talked about, there's a lot of details behind it. So you can catch them there. So Dan, over to you, please.
Yeah, I agree. I think and this is my own personal bias, my own personal need, right? I'm hoping that we end up with some kind of, as I called it earlier, last mile of AI, right? Recognizing what real people do on their desktops in real time, and thinking about how does AI play a role in that. I think it's going to require that we end up with, much more AI on the device. To your point about the AI PC, one of the forecasts I made was that why wouldn't I buy an AI PC now? I'm a little offended by Microsoft's campaign that says, kind of only smart and creative people need AI PCs. And I was like, what are you saying? Is that what I'm hearing?
What's the point? Yeah, exactly.
Right. I think it could be the death knell for the low end PCs, because why do you need a low end PC anymore? If it doesn't have AI on it and it's not doing context aware stuff in the future, then it's a second class machine, and people don't deserve second class machines. We all deserve the best technology we can get. So I think that's something. I think on the enterprise level, I think organizations are going to be kind of plugging through the process of making their value realizations. We'll probably see a slow churn of case studies, because if you're successful, as with AI back in the 1990s and previously, if you were successful at AI, you didn't talk about it. And so we're going to see, organizations doing things that we
Yeah.
may not really hear about, or we'll hear about in the abstract without a real proof case to it.
Yeah.
And I think look for those
So
signals, though.
are you saying that if we hear about a success is really not really success, because the real successes we will not hear because they
Well,
are actually reaping the benefits behind the scenes?
if we hear about a real success, I would say there's some self-serving marketing reason that we're hearing about it. If it's a
That's a good one.
competitive advantage and talking about it would trigger the competitor to go do the same thing, then we probably won't hear about it, right?
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's great. So Dan, thank you very much for your time today, and so very insightful. And so I'm sure we will run into each other at some other conference. So in the lunch line, I would think.
absolutely.
Yeah. So take care, Dan. So
Yeah, take
I'm
care.
very happy to have met you, and then it's been delightful discussion today.
Same here. Thank you for having me.